from the media, from politicians, and we don't mean gutter press here, we're talking mainstream media and politicians. You know, no one really questions some of the shocking things that the Tories come out with regards to the immigrants and refugees that are fleeing. However, even with that in mind, even with that, it is so heartening to see just how many people will give to refugees. When you look at some of the figures of people that have donated to Care for Calais and organisations like that, it's a huge number. So I think for us, it's about remembering that and continue to work with organisations like Care for Calais, you know, getting trade unions involved, getting delegations. When we could, we used to take people over to Calais. And that was really important because people could see that and to then report it back to their union branches and members and stuff. So I think for us, the solidarity work around the movement is so important, but also to constantly holding, you know, it works towards changing the narrative, doesn't it? I think that's the thing. And also is when racism happens, it's so important for us to address it, because very often there is this myth in society that, you know, people that are racist are somehow, oh, they're uneducated, they're working class. Actually, the majority of the racism that see, particularly, I mean, this is Islamophobia Awareness Month, and we see from politicians around against Muslims. I mean, some of the stuff has come from people like Boris Johnson, who have been to some of the best and most expensive schools supposedly in the country. You know, the idea that it's about people that are uneducated is a complete myth. And for us, it's really important to remember that. And you know, when we can, we're out on the streets, and the reason that we are out on the streets, so it gives other people the confidence to know that they're not on their own. I think there are people that watch the news and think, I'm horrified by what I'm seeing with people drowning, but the way that it's presented, it's almost like everyone has a problem with refugees, everyone has a problem with migration, and there's some consensus, but we know that's not true. So I think, you know, things like Stand Up to Racism, the placards that we had around migrants make the NHS have always gone down really well. And we need to remember that. The question around climate change, you see, I think it's really interesting, isn't it? We can talk about the climate and the impact it's going to have in particular places. So you've mentioned, Tim, you know, Bangladesh. Actually, the thing with climate change is it doesn't impact, and it doesn't know a border. So, you know, if there's a problem in Bangladesh, it's not going to contain itself in Bangladesh. You know, the impact of climate change happens across the world. It knows no borders. And so there has to be a solution that doesn't look at borders. And that's a problem, isn't it? If we are so focused on nation states and borders and our own interests, we're never going to be able to solve the question of climate change. And I think in one way, you know, yes, it's going to have an impact on certain parts of the world, but actually on the flip side of that, we have to use it to our advantage by arguing that actually the impact of climate is not going to be contained within borders, and therefore the solution isn't going to come within borders and nation states. It has to be a wider thing. So yeah, I think we, you know, on the one hand, we're going to have to argue that there will be a need to accept climate refugees. It's going to be horrendous, but at the same time, we need to work in the climate movement and argue that it's got to be a global solution.
Thank you for that.
We're not all born with racist ideas. It's very much something that is taught through society. And then that leads on to, you know, those people that hold these ideas because you're constantly bombarded by it. You know, you've grown up with this idea of the other, and, you know, this is, you know, we're all British or we're all English or whatever. And I think how you treat those people are very different from how you treat the likes of Boris Johnson, who use racism. We know they use it to divide us and distract us and stop us from holding them accountable for their problems, for you know, for what they've done. And actually, we have to be very clear on that. When we, someone said, when we do stores, and, you know, you can have discussions with people and you can win them over quite easily. And I think it is about the fact that they're just bombarded with, and they've never really thought about it. But we do hold others to account. People like Boris Johnson, who we clearly know are using it to divide us. People like Priti Patel, who are distracting us from what's really going on. And let's be very clear, right now, we are going to see, you know, because of austerity and also obviously the pandemic, we are going to see one of the biggest recessions that we've ever had. And so we will see despair. People will be looking to blame. And history has taught us when that happens, when they want us to pay for what they've done, they use racism because they want to stop us from fighting back. And that's absolutely key. So for us, we've got to be out on the streets. And someone mentioned, you know, Tommy Robinson. Tommy Robinson picked the Northwest for somewhere to stand, not because he just assumed, oh, we're in the North and, you know, we're more racist. It was because actually all the data showed us that within the Northwest, there were 12 areas on a study that showed that, I think it was out of 15 or whatever, but the 12 of them were in the Northwest, were the most deprived areas of the country. And so he was focusing on that, thinking, you know, deprivation, despair, all of that will be it'll be open season for me. It'll be easy for me to push my ideas of hate and division and all the rest of it. And I think for us, we need to fight for unity in the movement and to remember who's responsible. And, you know, someone said earlier about we can't look to politicians. You know, at the end of the day, there has to be a movement on the streets. Everything we won, whether it's racism or equal rights in the workplace or, you know, fighting sexism or whatever, it's all come from fighting on the streets and about unity in the working class. It's never come from being, you know, yes, we have legislation. Someone talked about why are they not doing anything about the refugee crisis where there are legal routes. Actually, majority of the legal routes have gone. You know, they've smashed the people's ability to turn to legal aid. They've smashed the safe routes people had, the legal routes people had to come into Britain and seek asylum. And we know because of climate change and everything else that's going on, we are going to see more refugees. They're not interested in the solution. It suits them to have these people living in the way they are, because then they can point the finger and blame them. Let's be quite honest, there is a massive economy, you know, an industry around immigration controls. You know, we talk about the cost of the visa system, the cost of running detention centers, the big contracts that go to G4S and Circle in these places. They've got the money to create all this, but they haven't, you know, then they tell us, you know, we can't allow anyone else in because we can't support them. This is an ideological position. When you see when we went over to Cali and you see those fences that are being built around Cali, they've been funded by Britain. They're not funded by the French government. That was money that Britain paid and put those fencing up, because it's not about the fact that there's no money to support refugees or all the rest of it. It is an ideological position, and we need to remember that. And while we work with, you know, and build movements, anti-racist movements and organizations like Stand Up to Racism, they're absolutely key in connecting the dots. We have to actually go further than Stand Up to Racism would do and actually say that the problem isn't just racism in society. It's about capitalism that creates the racism. It's about the very nature of you know, nation states that creates borders, that alongside it with the cruelty and everything creates racism in society. And actually that is the thing that we need to stop. Yes, we want to end racism, we want to pull down the borders, but actually it's a capitalist system that has created these borders and will continue to create those borders. And actually we as working class people, as internationalists, need to work across the borders and build an international movement that can change society for the better and end racism and border controls once and for all.
Excellent. I do believe we have one more